and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is Martin Willis, your host. And in just a minute, we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with UFO Updates. Our guest this evening is Charles Halt, and I'm very excited to have him on. He was, of course, the Air Force colonel and former base commander of RAF Bentwaters near Woodbridge. And during, of course, the 1980 encounter, I think is probably one of the most documented, or the most documented, actually, UFO sighting. Real excited about tonight's guest. I want to thank all the supporters for helping out with the show. Now, if you can't support the show and you still want to listen to the entire show for free, all you got to do is listen every Wednesday evening at 8 to 10 Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com, or you can listen to the show as a podcast the following evening, Thursdays, at 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time on the Dark Matter Digital Network. Supporters, I would like to thank you also in a couple of different ways. Next week, I'm going to draw some email names out for two prizes. And one of the prizes is going to be a book that is signed by Charles Halt, and it's called The Halt Perspective. If you look online, you'll see that that book is $40-some-odd up because it is an 800-page book. So this is going to be signed by him, and that is one of the Christmas drawings I'm going to do. The second one may take a few different people before I can get someone to actually take me up on it. And that is 4 nights at my guest house up on the mountain in Maine. You would probably want to come in the summertime because there's lakes nearby. There's hiking right outside the door. There's a lot to do in the area. It's a beautiful area. And so I'd love to have a person or a couple or even 2 couples if they'd like to come. But I'm going to be drawing for that. And also the person can sit in on a Wednesday night live in the studio during one of the shows. So that's another gift I'll be drawing. And again, how that's going to work is I'm going to reach out after I do a drawing and reach out to that person. If they can actually make it here to Maine, then they will be the winner. And I will keep drawing names until I find someone that can actually make it here and take me up on the Christmas offer. So that's it. Now, what if I draw your name, Alejandro?
That would be great. For which prize?
No, I can't.
I want to win at the book because it's $40-something. And why the heck? That's one thing I want to ask is why is it so dang expensive? That's a lot of money. And you price yourself out. Nobody wants to buy a book for that much.
Yeah, it's 800 pages. I think that's the justification of it. That I am going to ask him this evening about that. But I'm pretty sure. And
my concern is I want people to get it. You know, I want more. I think it's a great book to have. It's something everybody should have. But when it's that expensive, you know, you don't reach as big of an audience. And I think it needs as big of an audience as possible. Right.
And you and I both saw Charles down in North Carolina speak. And I know he's going to be at the UFO Congress this coming February. But I tell you what, a solid man, and there wasn't a word that he spoke that I didn't believe. I was I was glued to watching him speak about this situation. And his emotions and, you know, all that was really something.
Mm-hmm. He can come across gruff. I mean, I get to see him fairly regularly. Last I saw him was in Roswell. He was out there. But I saw him do this panel in Vegas and some others. And he comes across gruff, no doubt. But it's because, you know, you got to think colonels are like this. My girlfriend's dad is a colonel. Of course, there's John Alexander, who I speak with quite a bit. Colonels are the boss. And they are demanding, and they come across, it's do this, do that. This is the way things are. And he, integrity is a big deal, and the integrity of the story he's trying to tell. And of course, and I think people can understand, he experienced this amazing thing. And when people are expressing things that are inaccurate, it frustrates him. For instance, last week we talked on your show about this Steve Longaro. We've got the interview at openminds.tv that Philip Mantle did, and that made some news of this guy who was a witness at Rendlesham, but doesn't have a very good memory of what happened when. And so he's definitely seems to have some things wrong, at least when it comes to details. And, I was on and I had asked Halt a couple of things about that, and he was a bit disappointed in, the information that was off, and I'm sure he'll share that with you if you ask him about it here. But and then we had a reply, some lady saying, "Oh, I saw him the next day at the hospital," and he's like, "No, I wasn't at the hospital the next day. Who the heck is this lady?" And she may have seen him there at some point, maybe even months later or weeks later, but it wasn't the next day as she claimed, but she probably it was a long time ago. She probably has her memory wrong. In fact, I have absolutely no idea what I was doing on any given day in 1980, let alone Christmas.
Right. I can understand how the night of the events would be like burned in your memory, but, a day or two after, you're right. That's a long time ago to try to remember something accurately.
Yeah.
Unless there was something that she thought tied him into the event the next day. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, meeting you for the first time was a very big life event for me. And I remember it was at our conference, it was at the UFO Congress, but beyond that, I can't remember the details.
See,
I think you were wearing that T-shirt, though, that you didn't like then, though.
Yeah. See, now you got that wrong. See how the memory works?
Oh, I got it wrong?
Yeah, we met in North Carolina first.
Oh, see? Exactly, which was years before.
Yeah. Wow.
Ah, you're right. You even just referenced it earlier, but there you go.
Yep.
There you go.
Proof is in the pudding.
Mm-hmm. Pudding.
In the pudding. So what you said there's not a lot going on in the UFO world.
Well, and it's hard to say that. And I know lots of people will be like, oh, man, you're missing out. And there are a couple of stories. Now, here's the thing is that there are a couple of stories I'm following up on that look interesting. But I don't like to talk about them until I can verify them because there's so much bad information out there. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, if I'm not referencing a story that you've heard about or seen on Facebook, it's probably because it's a BS story that's in one of the UK tabloids that is just being blown out of proportion and it's not substantiated. Mm-hmm. And I just don't feel comfortable, sharing that kind of stuff. So I try to bring, some good information. But there's a couple sightings that we have for MOVE On that are interesting. And also, John Glenn, of course, passed away, unfortunately, in the last week. And there is kind of a cool video going around. Time Magazine, we have a link for them in our UFO headlines, posted it as well. But it's this clip. It's a really funny clip from Frasier. Did you see this?
No, I haven't.
Oh, so this is really funny. So essentially, Frasier and I can't remember what was the assistant's name, or like the
Daphne
lady at the Daphne.
Yeah,
I think. Oh no, Daphne was his girlfriend.
It was his brother's
English
girlfriend.
Lady.
Yeah.
Oh, yes,
No. I got
the one who worked in the radio station with him.
Oh, okay. Yes, I know. I could see her, but I don't remember her name. Yes.
So anyways, they're in the booth next door arguing about something, and John Glenn is sitting in the other booth, and he's like, they're recording him, and they're not paying attention to what he's saying. they've got him muted, and they're arguing. Well, meanwhile, John Glenn's like, for me, honesty is a big deal, and I've got to come clean on something. One time we were out there, and we saw this thing zipping around, and I don't know what the heck it was, and they told us to shut up about it, not tell anybody, and it could have been an alien or something, and it was, and so he's going off about this UFO thing, and then he comes in after it's done, and it's real funny because they're going back and forth. It gets done, and he comes in, and he's like, "Hey guys, about what I was just talking about," and they look at him and said, "Oh yeah, that's great," even though they didn't hear it. He said, "I think I went too far. Did you record? Where's that recording?" And she points to where the tape is, and he's like, "Yeah, I better take this." And he takes it and leaves, and it's just funny because, of course, that would have been a huge story, and they lost it. But yeah, so that's the only real UFO story around him. Really, I think that's a anything that you can hang your hat on or anything, which is in the story. It's just a Fraser thing, but that's something fun to look at. Otherwise, we do have another triangle UFO sighting that was submitted to MUFON, and these, of course, are just always fascinating, as you and I have talked about many times. This one's in Connecticut, a town called New Milford. And what's interesting with this is that this gentleman was approaching a stop sign. It was November 17th at 8:45 p.m., and he saw a brightly lit craft. It was really bright, and it was moving towards him. And as he got closer, he saw a blinking red light, but it was moving really slowly and low, and he said it was silent. And then it made a 90-degree turn, and at this point he could see it more clearly and saw it was a perfect black triangle is what he called it. So and he put a drawing with the sighting of what he had seen, but that I think is a pretty interesting sighting, and that like we talk about, what's up with these black triangle deals, man?
I know. And did he happen to say how big he thought the thing was?
No.
Yeah, because that's a lot of times you hear they're just enormous, but not always.
Yeah.
And if the thing that is puzzling when people say it's military, secret spacecraft and all that, top secret, is, if we do have something like this, it just seems like it would be such an astonishing, invention that it would be talked about more, or something, or used in a war, or, or something. For it to go over silently, quietly, and slowly is just something that just is really puzzling.
Yeah, especially for this phenomena to have been going on for so long. So it's pretty weird. So, but we're really excited. I really haven't announced it, but a lot of the theme of the Congress is going to be around the Phoenix Lights, because it's the 20th anniversary. 2017 will be, and the conference is a month before. The sightings happened in March, the actual 20th anniversary. So we're going to have a panel, and David Marler's going to be speaking at the conference. He's going to be speaking about the Battle of L.A., and he's done a lot of research on the famous photograph, and he's got some research and discoveries nobody's ever heard before that he's going to be talking about. So that's exciting. But he's going to be on the panel. Lynn Katai, who did the documentary about the Phoenix Lights, a great documentary, is going to be there. We haven't announced this, but James Fox will be there.
All right.
And because he did, a couple documentaries, and his documentaries included the Phoenix Lights, and he's going to be bringing with him some of these witnesses to the Phoenix Lights. So we'll hear first hand from them on the stage. But we're going to have a panel with these guys, and I think Richard Dolan, too, will be on that panel to talk about the Phoenix Lights and their significance and triangle UFO and those sort of topics. So that's going to be fun.
Wow, that's going to be awesome. I'm really excited about that. I know that James is still working on this 701 movie, and I know he said, it's a couple years out still. There's a lot that goes into something like that, and if anyone hasn't caught his previous movies, they're really, really good. One of my favorite UFO movie is his Out of the Blue, and what's the last one?
I Know What I Saw.
I Know What I Saw. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. Most people say the one or both are their favorite UFO documentaries, and they are really, really good ones. So, I know on the 701 they lost their funding for a period of time. So that happens sometimes when you have funding. Sometimes producers providing money back off for whatever reason, their own financial reasons. But they lost funding for a period of time, but supposedly they have gotten some new funding, so they are moving forward again. But we'll get an update on that at the conference.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Alejandro.
No problem. Thank you, my friend.
All right, and we'll talk next week.
That'll be just a couple days before Christmas.
That's right, next week. All right. Okay, everyone, so hang in there. After this quick music break, we'll be back with Charles Halt. Charles, welcome to the show. Charles, are you there? It's that mute button.
Can you hear me okay?
It was the mute button again. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. My pleasure.
Yes. So let's see. I was just looking. It was about 2 years. December 11th was the last time you were on. You were on with John Burroughs. But so glad to have you back. You have a new book out, and it's 800 pages long, and it's called the Halt. Boy, I'm having a brain cramp.
The Halt Perspective.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. The Halt Perspective. And how long did it take you to put that book together? I know you did with John Hanson.
About 2 years now.
Yeah?
That book is not written as a bestseller necessarily. That book is written for the serious UFO person that really wants to know the whole story, because it covers more than just what I did. It covers a whole lot of other, how shall I say, peripheral stuff, some of which is nonsense, and explains it, and I comment on it.
Uh-huh.
It's got 1,000 pictures, some in color.
Oh, in color, yeah. So this was a, just to clear the air a little bit, because I know, you heard Alejandro mention that it was an expensive book, and, few people commented in the chat room. But this thing, anything, I know from experience from printing that anything you print in color costs a good deal of money. So this book was very expensive for you to actually have published and printed.
I don't expect to make any money, maybe $1 or $2 if that's not the intent of the book. The intent of the book is to get the truth out there.
Uh-huh. Wow, good. And how's the response been so far? I saw it had some really good reviews.
Well, I just looked at Amazon, and the first 5 reviews are all 5-star.
Yeah, that's great.
In fact, I'm going over to my vacation home to meet a guy from driving all the way up from Gatlinburg, Tennessee, that wants to talk to me about the book.
Really? That's great. Wow. We've had a ton of questions come in, and I'm sure there'll be plenty in the chat room as well. But we've had them come in from email, from the forum. So I'm sure we're going to get to them. But I had a couple of questions. I don't really want to bore the listener who, this to me is one of the iconic cases, and we really don't have to go into the whole story of it. There's plenty of information out there. If you're new to the show, you can just check anything about Rendlesham Forest. There's a ton of things on YouTube and some TV shows.
There, and about 10 or 20% of that is nonsense.
Yeah, that's kind of goes across the board with anything, when it comes to what people put on YouTube. I think it does anyway. But I would like to ask you a couple of questions. Now, maybe these have been asked before, but just a couple of things I was thinking of that may not have been asked. And I'd like to start right out with those, some questions that I put together for you. And that is, after the incident, I understand that, everybody was debriefed or interrogated or whatever you want to say. But the thing that really puzzles me is, why did they let you and Peniston keep such strong evidence, such as the recording, Peniston's little notebook, the plaster casts, and things like that? Why did they not want those things handed over?
Number one, I don't think they knew about the plaster casts. Keep in mind, Peniston's plaster casts disappeared. Now, maybe you don't know the whole story on that, but one of them was put inside a sealed, taped-up box, numbered, inventoried, and put inside a larger box, put inside a huge shipping crate, which is caulked and sealed and nailed closed, and shipped to the States. When they opened that big box, guess what? The cast was gone, and the other cast disappeared. The only cast that's still available is the one he gave me, which I hid away. That's number one. Now, I don't think anybody knew much about my tape. Yes, the senior officers did, but they didn't think it would ever go to light. My memo, there was no copy ever kept in the office. It was typed on a select typewriter. You probably remember those. That was before word processors. We did have a carbon manifold, which disappeared somewhere in the office. So when Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood, the authors of Clear Intent, came in initially and requested under Freedom of Information to get a copy of my memo, we didn't have it. When I needed a copy, I had to go on the Internet. Would you believe that, to get it? And the tape, I kept the tape. I did not share it with anybody, but Ted Conrad, who was my boss at the time, asked me to make him a copy. I realize now that copy was given to General Gabriel. I didn't know that 2 years later. The British told me that, would you believe? He put the copy back in his desk drawer. It's on a little microcassette. And Sam Morgan found it. Well, Sam Morgan and I weren't exactly on the same frequency, let's put it that way. And Sam thought it was funny, so he started playing it at cocktail parties, and somebody told somebody who told somebody. And Harry Harris, a UFO investigator and a lawyer, so to speak, from Manchester, managed to get his hands on it and sold it for a small fortune.
Really?
So the tape got out, my memo got out, and what can I say? Oh, I didn't tell you how the memo got out. The memo was sent to the MOD through Don Moreland. Don Moreland kept a copy, and unbeknownst to me, he sent a copy to the liaison officer, his boss, at 3rd Air Force. He put it in the file. Well, when Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood came in to Bentwaters, and we said we didn't have anything, which we didn't, they went to 3rd Air Force. And my good friend Pete Bent, who was then the 3rd Air Force commander, talked to the RAF, and they said, oh, we have a copy in our files. So he called me, and he said, hey, Chuck, because we were friends, I'm going to have to release your memo. I said, no way. Burn it. Your life and mine will never be the same. I didn't want all the publicity. It was not career enhancing. He said, I've got to release it. I said, no, you don't. He released it. Well, after that, a day or two later after it hit the States, BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, German TV, Japanese TV, Radio Orwell, on and on and on, were all on my doorstep.
Wow.
I had to go into hiding. I was furious.
I bet. Well, let me ask you this question, kind of following that line. If this had not come out in that way, or that, what Larry Warren did, if it did not come out publicly, do you think knowing your personality, do you think eventually that you would have talked about it, or would you have just kept this thing to yourself your whole life?
I just would not have talked about it anymore.
Really? Wow.
I had no intent. I did not want the publicity. I didn't need it. I have my own life. I knew what would happen.
Right. So what has it changed? Obviously, we can see that it's definitely changed things in your life, but what are some things that it's changed in your life besides you just, writing a book and things like that and speaking at conferences?
Well, what I try and do, and John Burroughs and Jim Pennison have real problems, and we can talk about that later, but I put it on the shelf. I don't even deal with it daily. I don't pay any attention to it. In fact, I wasn't even going to do the book until I was pushed into it by, we can talk about that a little later, too. No, it hasn't affected me much other than I've gone to a few conferences and I've talked a few times with a few people such as you just to get the truth out. It's important.
Uh-huh. Yes, and I don't know, you were listening to the news earlier, and I mentioned that when I listened to you in North Carolina, I really felt like I was hearing the truth, and I really appreciate that. Now, being a base commander in general, you must have a terrific amount of pressure on you, and especially a base like RAF Bentwaters. And I know it's classified. You can't talk about if there was or was not nuclear arms there, but whatever, you had your hands full. Was that a real high-pressure job to begin with?
Well, let's put it in perspective. That was the largest tactical fighter wing in the free world. 2 geographically separated bases in England, 6 FOLs, 4 active, 2 standby, and 14,000 people.
Wow.
It's a small city.
Yeah.
I worried about paving the runway, paving the roads. I worried about security of the fence. I worried, I had confrontation with a motorcycle gang, on and on and on, you name it.
Wow. Yeah. So your day-to-day life, I'm sure, was full of, was very busy, I bet. Especially I never realized there was that many people involved. Amazing.
My day never stopped.
Right. So you had to make a lot of decisions. You had to direct people. And when you first heard about this happening on the 26th or 27th, whenever it was.
The night of the 25th, the morning of the 26th.
And you just, at that time, did you just think it was a bunch of baloney, or did you?
No, I didn't think it was baloney because I knew some of the people involved, but I thought there had to be a logical explanation, and I won't say I brushed it off, but I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. I picked up the blotters, and I took them up to the office, and then that was a Monday morning, as I remember. We had a staff meeting, and the senior officers all read the blotter, and they kind of chuckled, and I said, yeah, something happened out there. We don't know what it was, but I'm not concerned. Then I realized as the day wore on, et cetera, that all the cops were looking to the sky, and, the cops went crazy over this.
Wow. Now, did you feel like ahead of time, before this ever happened, let me rephrase that, before this ever happened, did you ever think about the UFO topic at all, or was it just something so far removed from your daily life that you didn't think about it?
Well, let me explain. When I was about 13 or 14, our church had a big rummage sale. You know what that is? It's sort of like a big garage sale. Everybody in the church puts stuff up, brings all the stuff, everything from paintings to you name it. And I got tasked by my mother to help unload vehicles and put stuff out, sort things. And a big box of books came in, and I was an avid reader. And there was a book in there by Donald Kehoe. You've probably heard of the book.
Yeah.
A classic, along another book or two. And so for about 20 cents, I bought 2 or 3 books, including that one. I read it, and I thought, that's very interesting. I forgot all about it. I never gave another thought to UFOs or anything of that nature until what happened at Bentwaters. I don't even remember reading about the Battle of L.A. I don't remember reading about the stuff over D.C. I certainly remember the Korean War, but I don't remember anything. Didn't pay any attention to it all.
Wow. Yeah. And then it just got shown right in your face. The one question I think I heard you talk about at one time is when you came out publicly, when you actually spoke about it yourself. You heard everyone else talking about it. And I do want to talk about the kind of convoluted controversy among the witnesses. But before that, was there ever any type of threatening feeling or any type of blatant threats to you?
None whatsoever, but I have to say very early on, when I started, I actually was trying to work with Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood when they finished Clear Intent and were ready to start another book, and they were working with Larry Warren until they found out he was a fraud. So anyhow, I even signed an agreement, but the agreement was they would stick entirely to the truth, entirely to facts. Well, they gave up. But I did give them, a good listen, and I sat down and I made a tape of everything I knew, and I think Barry Greenwood probably still has it, and I have several copies that, how shall I say, have been put away in separate places.
Now, speaking of the recording, going back to the recording we talked about earlier, that there's little bits and pieces, and then there's the 21-minute version I listened to that someone posted on YouTube. And in that, it has you in the forest, and you're looking at the scarred trees. You're taking radio, what am I trying to think of?
Readings with the APN 27.
Right. And then there's the star, what is that called? The star that you...
Starlight scope. That's actually a night vision scope. It's first generation.
And then you were looking at, and there was some like heat or some type of heat still?
Well, I don't know. I just said heat. I didn't know.
I see.
There was something that illuminated. When you look through them, if you ever look through a night vision scope, the original version, some of the newer ones are much better. Everything is greenish yellow. There was some brighter stuff.
I see. So you were getting readings on the inside. It sounded like in your conversation you were getting readings on the inside of where the indentations were in the soil. Now, who ended up bringing you out to that very spot where where Peniston? Go ahead.
Bruce England came and retrieved me from. We were having the year-end. We called it the Christmas party, year-end party. It was a family affair, covered dish dinner on Woodbridge Base at the Woody Bar, which is a very classic place. That's where 12 O'Clock High was partly filmed. Mm-hmm. And he came in and said, "It's back." And, I almost went into shock. "What's back?" He said, "The UFO's back." I said, "Oh, come on, Bruce." He said, "No, there's something out in the forest we can't explain." Mm-hmm. So Conrad had to give a speech and make some awards and presentations and thank some people. So he said, "Go put this to rest." That's how I got involved.
I see. Yeah. Now, but did you actually went to the very site where the craft supposedly had landed the day before?
That's where Bruce took me.
I see. Okay. And when did you actually see...
I also took a soil sample. Now, an interesting thing is, I had a British friend 3 or 4 days later come out, and he also took a soil sample and had it analyzed, which I have mine analyzed later, but we can talk about that. And he said, "Oh, I know how this happened. There's traces of calcium carbonate there." I said, "Yes. Peniston made plaster casts, so obviously there'll be some calcium carbonate there." So I knew I was where he took the casts.
I see. Okay. And is that the vantage point from where you saw the object that looked like the eyeball?
Yes.
So right from there. And did that...
Right from there. That's when we first saw it.
Yeah.
And of course, we moved, trying to get closer to it after it came into the forest. We watched it. It went back out into the field. We watched it. We went up to the edge of the fence, which was at the edge of the forest. And there's a farmer's field out there then, and the farmer's house was beyond.
And is that when all the farm animals became quiet, or
they were real quiet then when we went out into the field?
And so I've been trying. I've heard you talk about this thing that looked like an eyeball, and it's really intriguing because I also heard at one point that from the weapons area with a 12 magnified set of binoculars, it looked triangular, and so that's what Jim Peniston also described. But this thing defied everything else. It had looked like molten dripping off of it.
That's the best way I can describe it.
And
having worked in the steel mill when I was in college and watched them pour, stuff from the crucible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, what the people in the weapons storage area described was much larger and up over them, not toward the coast more. What Jim Penniston saw was 9 feet approximately on the side and was on the ground till it levitated and did whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And did this thing move in a steady line, or did it move up and down, or zigzag, or any?
It came straight toward us into the forest, and when it went into the forest, it moved up and down, and in other words, avoiding the trees, like it was under intelligent control.
Wow.
As far as I could determine, it did not hit any tree.
Wow.
Now, the forest was Corsica pines. They were about 12, 14, 16 inches diameter and 150, 200 or more feet high, and with a heavy canopy overhead and very few lower branches because they shut off the light.
Mm-hmm. Now, but the other craft, apparently, when it exited the landing area, it actually bumped into the trees, right? There were some branches and some scuffs on the trees?
Well, I don't know that for a fact. There were some branches on the ground, and when you looked up overhead, there was the equivalent of a hole, so to speak, in the tree canopy.
Right. Now, when you and I met in North Carolina, I told you the story that a friend of mine had when he was watching this UFO, and the one he saw was in the shape of a box. He said it was just square like a box, and then it burst into 5 lights, and you said, oh, my God, that's exactly the number that this thing, the eyeball thing, burst into 5 lights. That's what the
eyeball did. It just, it's sort of like a fireworks display, but it did it silently.
And did my friend that had the sighting I just mentioned, said that these 5 lights, they made like a formation and blinked and things like that. Did the 5 lights that you saw just disappear, or did they do something?
No, they exploded. They went out 10, 20, 30 feet or something. I can't remember exactly how far, and they just disappeared. They were gone.
Wow. And so
that's when I said, let's go out into the field and see if we can find some residue or some burn marks on the ground or something from whatever was dripping off the object we saw. And we found nothing except, cow pies.
That must be, I mean, what were you thinking? I mean, how could this happen?
Well, I was thinking I didn't want to be there, and how did I ever get involved in this? Nobody's going to believe this. This didn't happen. How can I get out of this now?
Yeah, I bet. I mean, to see this thing burst and then totally disappear, I mean, this kind of just defies everything that you can possibly think of. I mean...
Well, I first thought it was ball lightning or something like that, but when it exploded, ball lightning doesn't do that.
Right. And someone else mentioned that this thing looked almost like it had a pupil.
It did. I said that. It had a dark center.
Yeah. Wow. And what were the colors?
It was a reddish orange. It's very glowing, just like a fire.
Yeah.
And we could see it clearly. At that time, the farmer's house, which was directly across the field from us, and it was in between us, now there's the large hedge, but there was low hedges, and first and second floor windows on this side, the side toward us, were flickering brightly, and I was thinking, wow, I wonder if this is affecting those people in the house. I was concerned for them.
Oh, yeah. And there were some civilian witnesses, right, that came forward eventually?
Not right there with us.
Uh-huh.
There were some came forward later that saw things from, different vantage points.
Right. Now, going and changing a little bit here, I do want to talk more about the sighting, but one of the things that always seems to be talked about is why is there so much controversy between all the witnesses, not all of them, but the witnesses that actually speak about this?
Well, the biggest thing is the book left at the East Gate. It's the biggest joke it's ever been. I tell you what, it's the biggest fraud that's ever been worked on the UFO community, and I can go through the book and give you 50 examples with the impossible nonsense, didn't happen.
Okay.
Would you like me to do that?
You certainly can. One of the things I wanted to ask you, did either Peter or Larry, when they were writing that book, were they in touch with you and ask you questions?
Multiple times, and I kept telling Peter, you're on a dying horse riding it to death. I didn't think Larry was there. There's a remote possibility he was very far in the background, but he's admitted on multiple occasions to Linda Moulton Howe, to Sally Rail, to Barry Greenwood, and on and on and on, that he took somebody else's story, which is not entirely correct, and he made a big issue out of it.
Uh-huh. Now, there's Steve, I want to say his name is Longwood. Have you read that interview? Because Longaro.
I have.
Uh-huh.
Let me tell you, I talked to his supervisor. I talked to other people. Nobody saw him out there. His supervisor said he was on duty in the Charlie area. If he left his post and was out there, he had to climb over the fence or drive 2 or 3 miles around to get there. Nobody saw him out there. Nobody knows anything about it. And he has the first night and the third night mixed up. He was not on duty the third night when I was out there. And he says the first night he saw me. Well, I wasn't out there the first night.
Okay.
And there's more. I mean, I'm not saying he's a liar. I'm saying his probably time has taken its toll on his memory, maybe. But he had probably heard a bit on the radio, the cop radio.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing I can think. I have no idea, but I can tell you he was not there.
Someone just wrote me today and said they thought the story was very weak. That's how they put it. Steve Longaro's story.
Now, the question is, the real story is what happened, but there's a very good story, what happened afterwards to all the people and all the spooks that were involved and all the different funny things that have happened through the years. The different people, especially there at Bentwaters. And I could go into great detail on that. I have 3 or 4 file cabinets full. I've saved every email for 35 years, all the newspaper clippings. I've been able to put things together, if you know what I mean, and every time someone comes out, I can go back and fit it in. And there's just so much nonsense out there. I'll tell you what, the spooks were heavily involved. I have the picture and the name of the CIA cleanup doctor who was on the base within days, the one who worked on the people with their debriefing.
Mm-hmm. All right.
How about that?
Wow,
and I verified his name with multiple very, how shall I say, reputable people who are in the UFO field that know what's going on. They said, oh, that's the guy they normally send in to clean things up.
Okay, so you were starting to tell us about, there were some examples in the book, Left at East Gate. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you wanted to talk a little bit about that, and go ahead.
Well, you want to talk about the pictures in the book first?
Sure. Okay.
Okay. If you turn to the pictures in the middle of the book, there's a picture that shows the entry to the base, to the community side. It shows a sign that says, alert condition. But there's a bunker in front of it that cuts off. The bottom says, all clear. If there were an alert, there would be a cop in black vest, helmet, etc., standing at the gate.
Mm-hmm.
How about that?
Mm-hmm.
There's a picture that shows an underground facility that infers there must be something there with vents. Guess what it is? It's a fuel bladder that has earth on top of it to protect it, to keep it cool, and also blast protection. There's a picture of what's called the base photo lab, where supposedly Larry was taken underground down an elevator to a place the size of the Astrodome. It's a command post. The command post is a reinforced steel concrete building with blast walls around it, sits on 3 or 4 feet of concrete. It does have an emergency escape hatch, which people now say, oh, there's a secret tunnel going somewhere. It's nothing but a door that goes out under the wall, and it was never used in exercises or anything. In fact, the only reason I knew about it is because my next-door neighbor was one of the EAC, that's the emergency action officers, or the guys that man the command post round the clock. I said to him one time, what happens if that big bank vault-like door ever got jammed with a nuclear explosion or something? He says, oh, there's a hatch over there in the computer room that we can all crawl out through, but we have to break through the dirt to get out, but we can get out if we have to. The command post is now, guess what, a museum. I would invite anybody to go there. Now I'll tell you a little more. The base on the airfield side, where the command post is, was bought by my friend Bill Kimball and Jeannie. They're personal friends of mine. Their son John and Sarah run Bentwaters Park. People will be welcome to go there and talk to them and say, where's the big underground facility? Guess what? And I can go on and on and on.
Now,
I mean, for instance, on page 32, it says, there was a helping hand, which is a very serious event. There was no helping hand. Shots were fired at A-10s. Guess what? If that happened, there would have been a response like you can't believe. And I can just go on and on and on and on.
Now, when did the base close?
19. Oh gosh, I can't remember the exact date. About 6, 7, 8 years ago.
Okay.
Much later.
So, is the area open to the public, like, or is it fenced off?
On invitation, and when the museum's open, yes.
I see.
I was there last year and took a tour of the base again with some of the people. Like I say, I know the people that own the airfield. Because we have what was called an Anglo-American committee when I was there. The senior officers on the base and all the high sheriff, all the wealthy people around, the chairman of the county council. We had regular social events. In fact, we would meet occasionally at Bill Kimball's house. So there is nothing there. There is a partly below ground conference room under the OSI building. The Intel building had a partial underground storage building, and there is a building across the far side of the base that was built later that may have an underground storage facility, but we're talking something the size of a house or less. There is no Astrodome-sized thing with elevators, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
All the nonsense about being picked up by Chinese-looking guys driving a limousine and gassed and going on to the airfield side of the base. Let me tell you something. If somebody came with a limousine on the base, we all knew it, the senior officers, all the cops, because they were bored to death at the gate. And he would have never have gotten on the airfield side of the base with a plate, New York City plate on the car. Gosh.
Now, let me ask you something.
So
how many people would you say in both occurrences in total actually witnessed something?
The first night, the only people that witnessed anything probably were the 3 people, Burroughs, Peniston, and Cabanas-Sack, that went out. The rest of the gate didn't see much of anything except perhaps lights from a distance.
Yeah.
The second night, Bobby Ball and what's her name, Lieutenant, I've forgotten her name now, Bonnie Tamplin, were probably the only ones, although somebody else may have been there too. The third night when I went out with Bruce England, there were 4 people with me, 5 of us total. There were probably 15 cops, maybe 16 or 17, including John Burroughs, who hitchhiked the ride out there, available or there. But they were told to stay back where the vehicles were on the Forest Service Road. They did not come into the forest until the 5 of us returned. I sent everybody back to the base. There was still 1 or 2 cop vehicles there with a couple of light-alls. And Burroughs said to me, I want to go forward and look again. I said, okay, but make it quick. And Bustinza, who was with me the whole time, I mean, he hugged me so tight he could have kissed me. He was frightened to death. He and Bustinza went forward to where the supposed landing site was and came back in, 5 minutes or less, because it was only 100 yards and we could see them. And we all went back to the base, and that was it. Now, how many people in the WSA? I don't know. There were multiple people out there. Some people went up in the tower. Some people were on the ground, on the bunker. So I can't tell exactly how many, less than 20 or 25 at the most. Not even that many, probably.
Now, are there some people that refuse to speak about it at all? That you're aware of?
Bruce England won't talk about it anymore. Bustinza doesn't want to talk. I really feel for Bustinza. He was worked on. Something happened to him in the debriefing, because he talked about underground facilities and all kinds of things. He never left my side until he went back with Burroughs for about 5 minutes.
Now, so he was messed with, and so were other people, and Larry...
So were other people, including Larry Warren, because Larry Warren was running around the base with his hair on fire. Larry Warren, in the book, says he was in Germany. His girlfriend says that's not true. He was in the dorm drinking with us in a dorm bar somebody set up in their room, and was very furious that he wasn't involved. then big evidence that Peter Robbins says is that, well, he wrote a letter to his mom. Read the letter. It says, some guys saw a UFO. It doesn't say, I was out there and this happened.
Oh, wow. So, Well, interesting. And so they were worked on, and they
were there's no doubt in
given...
my mind. If you go do a little research, go to Nick Pope's website. The OSI has a document, so does the CIA. They're allowed to use hypnosis. There's a list of 400 or 500 drugs that they're allowed to use, everything from sodium emerald, sodium pentothal, LSD, to stuff I've never heard of before. And there's the procedures. Here's how you get permission to hypnotize somebody when you need to do it. Would you believe that?
And do they did this in hopes that people just wouldn't talk about it? Is that right? Is that
what they were doing is putting up a smokescreen, disinformation, which they're skilled at. Believe me. There's the whole science of that. I know a whole lot more about that than I can talk about. But, yes. So when it came out, if it came out, that everybody would say, oh, little green man, this and that, and the next thing, ha, ha, ha.
Wow, yeah. Boy, it just bothers me to hear this. And I know that John Burroughs...
I've only scratched the surface. You have no idea.
Yeah, and John Burroughs is actually getting some compensation for what he is relating to some health issues.
Yeah, read my book, a copy of my letter, and Gordon Williams' letters in there. And he also got some help from the CIA, by the way.
Now, what?
Now, what John's heart problem, is that related to the event? I don't know. It could be. I have no idea. I'm not a doctor. Jim Pennison has some medical problems. I understand Bastenza does. I don't know. I can't tell you.
Yeah. Jim, I've invited on this show, and he keeps saying he's going to be on eventually. I'm not sure if he will or not. You know, one of the things I question about him, and a couple of questions came in about that, is he seems like a good guy and all that, but this download that he supposedly received, I kind of question that. I'll put it that way. And
well, I'd rather not comment on that because I have no knowledge of it.
Yeah. And he is, you from what I understand from the past things that you said, you kind of go along the line where you think it's most likely, or it does make sense that this could be extraterrestrial, and he thinks it's time travel. And
I think it's extraterrestrial, and I think they're here.
Yeah. I do too. That's why I do the show.
Good for you.
Yeah. So someone, you just mentioned disinformation, and that fascinates me because there seems to be so much of that in this when it comes to UFOs. So how would disinformation apply in this case?
It muddies the water. Now, let me tell you, something happened in the when we started working on the book and got pretty serious until the end of the book. Larry Warren's girlfriend from that time frame came forward. And she, amongst other things, says, well, Larry wasn't there, for starters, but that's one thing. The other thing she says is she was used as a what do you want to call it, a snitch, an undercover, whatever, for the OSI. And they took her in, they drugged her, and they hypnotized her. In fact, she even used a term they called her Bambi eyes, which kind of indicates maybe she knows what she's talking about. Then she says she was out in the forest all 3 nights. Nonsense. And she remembers seeing me and giving me a ride back. Nonsense. There's so much stuff coming from, that's way out there.
Wow. I see. And so this is all an attempt just to make the whole thing screwy, basically.
Yes.
And in the news, I'm sure you heard Alejandro mention that someone claims they saw you at the hospital the day after or something like that. And that's another thing?
The only time I remember going over there was I talked to the hospital commander on official business from time to time. And I did have a problem with my wrist or my carpal tunnel. And went over and got a brace to put on my arm for a while. I don't ever remember going to the clinic for anything other than a routine shot or something.
Okay. Let's see. There is a question in the with in the forum. And by the way, if you're listening, you can join the forum, and there's a lot of conversations, UFO sightings, things like that people post that they've seen. But anyway, you can also post questions for the guests that are upcoming. And this question here says, with the benefit of hindsight, would you change anything that you did that night and the following from that night on if you could go back in time?
I wouldn't have gone, number one. Number two, I probably wouldn't have shared my tape with Gordon Williams.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the problem was he heard me on the radio because he never turned his radio off. I don't think he even turned it off at night.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because his comment to me when I ran into him the next morning, see, after the incident, I went home. I couldn't sleep. I took a shower. I had something to eat. I went into the office. And we shared a building with him. He was on the one side, and we were on the other side. And as I was going into the building, he came in. And he made a comment, something like, "Boy, that must have been some experience last night." And I said, "Yeah, boss." I said, "And I made a tape." He said, "Let me hear it." And I played the tape for him. And he said, "Let me have it." So he took my tape and the recorder. I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Well, we have a staff meeting," and I knew it. 3rd Air Force, which was all the commanders in England, got together with the 3rd Air Force commander every Wednesday morning. He said, "I'm going to play for General Baisley, the commander." I said, uh-oh. Well, I worried. That was Monday. I worried till he came back on Wednesday, and I was waiting for him when he came in the door. And I said, "What, do I still have a job, boss?" And he threw me the tape and laughed. I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, I played it for General and the staff." And everybody was quiet. And he said, I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, the general turned to the staff and says, 'Well, what do we do?' And nobody said anything. So the general, in his infinite wisdom, said, 'Well, it happened off the base. It's a British affair. Case closed.'"
Wow. Yeah.
Well, I thought that was a pretty good response. That's what I would have probably said if I'd have thought about it as a general. So I couldn't do anything with it, because Don Moreland was on holiday in Wales. That was his home. He'd gone up there for the Christmas holiday. By the way, the book says he was out in the field with me. Nonsense. But anyhow, I left at the East Gate says that. He came back about 8 or 10 days later. That's why my memo is dated much later. And I said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "Well, I don't know." So he made some phone calls, and he came back and says, "Well, do me a memo or something." So I wrote the memo. It was typed in the office. Conrad read it, my boss. He took it down to Gordon Williams' office. Okay. Came back, gave it to me, and said, "Okay." So I gave it to Don Moreland. Never thought any more about it. Well, I found out later, not too long ago, that the CIA had it almost immediately. Well, guess where they got it? From Gordon Williams, or his office. His exec didn't know anything about it because I knew him personally. And he said to me, "Well, tell me about this. I don't know anything about it." So guess what?
Wow. So when these, who would be the agency or what part of the Air Force or whatever interrogated the witnesses or debriefed them, so to speak?
Well, the OSI didn't do it. They facilitated it. It happened in their facility. Keep in mind, a day or two later, Chuck Matthews, who was the OSI commander and a good personal friend, I said to him, "Do you have any interest in this?" I thought they would be all excited and interested in it. He said, "No, we don't do this sort of stuff. We're not interested at all." What a lie.
Wow.
So, I thought, okay. Then I found out that NIS, or NCIS, or whatever the term was then, I forgot. I think it was NIS then. Naval Intelligence has responsibility for Great Britain as far as intelligence and spook stuff. The world's divided up amongst the various service, Army, Navy, Air Force, etc. And the Navy had the UK. So when some of the guys say some naval officer was there and did things in guys in civilian clothes, it was probably a naval officer who worked with or for the NIS, CIA, or NSA, or who knows who. There's so many spook agencies. They all fight amongst themselves. But we do know that the CIA was there, and we do know that the doctor was there that administered whatever they did.
Now, why do you think the reason for, I guess you would call it the cover-up, would be for reasons of national security? What else would it be if it wasn't that?
This is beyond the government. Let me tell you. Everybody got all excited when Hillary Clinton looked like she was going to be elected because John Podesta is going to push her and they're going to release all the government files. There are no government files to release. The agencies collect stuff, forward stuff, fight amongst themselves, but there is offshore, not necessarily out of the country, agency, civilian, contracted, however. I would look at some people like SSAIC, Bigelow Industries, Lockheed, and on and on and on, and perhaps some retired senior executives, military, whatever. Small group loosely put together that records are impossible to get to that are managing this whole thing.
Well, that's it for the free part of the show. If you want to listen to the full 2-hour shows, all you have to do is support us for $2 or more per month. Very interesting show in the second hour. And anyway, our guest next week is Jason McClellan. He used to be on Open Minds with Alejandro Rojas. And I want to thank a few people, including Alejandro, for helping out with the news. Our guest, of course, Charles Halt. And the people that help make this show work so well over at Dark Matter Digital Network. I want to thank Keith for running our shows over there. Angel for running the show on the live show that is on PSN network there. And Peggy Shunning for managing the Facebook page. We have about 23,000 or so people on there. It's a good interactive site with latest UFO news always posted. Peggy does a good job with that. So again, Jason McClellan, we'll be back with him next week. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.